A couple comments. There's obviously, this is a big historical moment, but, I would just say as Christians, if I can just wax elegant for just a moment about just kind of the war and all the things we're hearing about. I've been following sort of geopolitics and the news pretty seriously for the last, I'd say, decade. And I remember when I was when I first met my wife. So she was a student at Columbia University, and so this was back in like 2002. So, September 11th was just very recent. I mean, it just happened a year earlier. And I remember at that time, a couple of years later, Columbia University had Ahmadinejad as one of the speakers there, and he was very, very pro-Islam, very, very anti-America. And I remember at the time, as a brand new Christian who had already been kind of following politics, being kind of shocked at this and just not super politically engaged at the time, and then understanding a little bit more of the Christian worldview and starting to understand where maybe I fit in some of these views, and that was just so shocking to me. Fast forward all this time, Iran has been such a big geopolitical threat on the board for such a long time, and as Christians right now in the Christian culture, there's a group that I've referred to, maybe a month or two ago. I mentioned the Nick Fuentes stuff, but basically it's coming from largely people that come from a sort of theonomic background and in the geopolitics, and there's like a coalescence where there's so much doubt and upsetness about what's happening in this sort of conflict with Iran. This is one of those ones where if you don't know what's going on, don't comment. If you don't know that much, the basic issue of it, I think this is one of the most, if you want to know where I stand, because I feel like maybe you do, I think this is one of the most awesome things I've seen our country do since I've watched politics. I think it's a big deal. I think it was courageous. I think it was awesome for a few reasons that people aren't always talking about. I think right now, if you look at sort of the United States leadership geopolitically in the world, we have an interesting relationship with our European allies and some of the rest. I really appreciate the United States went forward on this and worked with Israel and went forward without having to do a lot of hand-wringing and the rest with the Europeans. We went forward, and you're watching just the head of NATO just speaking positively about this as well. I think how it's going to go in the end is going to be determined by the success of all of it. In other words, if you remember back in Iraq and the earlier wars, there was a lot of salesmanship going on to sell the United States on the benefit of going in to take out Saddam Hussein and the rest. And it really didn't matter, because in the end, the way the war was judged was by how it was finished, and it wasn't finished well, and so it was judged as a failure. Trump, I think, made a smart calculation here to make a move. I don't think many of us in this church probably do understand it, but the sheer magnitude of what we just watched is historical and worth pondering for just a moment, right? We took out a nation that is considered a big hitter, and we took out so much of their leadership, their missile capacity. In like 72 hours, their entire Navy has been sunk, as far as I understand it. And we've lost apparently 6 soldiers already, and that's always tragic, but that's never even been, that's not even heard of in the history of warfare, anything like what we're watching, anything like it. And it's an amazing feat. And this was done, again, for good reason. There's a few things I think that have been said that are really important that I feel good about. I'll tell you the first one. After September 11th, I remember the hard part is I just became a Christian the following year. And I remember the big shock to me was George W. Bush's constant refrain that it was extremism that led to the Twin Towers falling. It was extremism. We did oppose extremism. And it was a punting of the issue, because the issue wasn't ultimately just extremism. The issue was I would say, literal Islam. Now, I'm not saying that Muslims are all terrorists. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that Islam itself, as you follow it to its conclusions, is a religion that is incorrect. Those people that flew those planes into the Twin Towers were not more wicked than other people. They were more wrong than other people. And I think we have to remind ourselves of that. They were zealots of Islam. And people say, well, no, that's just an interpretation of Islam. I'm like, okay. Well, that's like saying that what we believe is just an interpretation of the Bible. They were literalists. They were taking jihad seriously. Well, since then, Islam had some PR problems, right? Because obviously ISIS and the rise of, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, all the things that have happened since then kind of got rid of the idea that, Islam was always a peace-loving religion. Again, Muslims themselves are wonderful people, amen, okay? But Islam itself is a religion that wants to spread its geopolitical tentacles by the sword. It has been the way that Muhammad grew it in the very beginning. This is not a controversial thing to say. There's a really big thing you have to ask yourself, and I felt compelled to say this to you because I feel like, I have the mic, so I'm going to. But Iran is one of the most oil-rich, resource-rich countries in the world. And in the Middle East, they're perfectly poised to be invited into sort of trade in the world, but they haven't wanted to do that. They've kept their money back and invested constantly, very similar to Hamas, who they funded, on the destruction of Israel. This is an ideological group of people that since 1979 has been ideologically focused on the destruction of the West and building the Islamic sort of dream on the rubble of Western civilization. This is their stated goal. It has always been their stated goal. It is naive as Christians to say that this is just a neutral thing where we're going to say, whatever. Now, I'm not saying this is a religious holy war on our part, but this is a people who were dead set against the very existence of this nation from the day one. It is 100% their point. The fact that we took decisive action as they've been raising up their production of not just their nuclear ability, but also the production of their drones and this stuff very, very rapidly. And this was a good move, I think, and a courageous move. Now, you can disagree with me. That's the whole point of being in a free country. What I would urge you as a Christian to watch out for is stupidness. Iran's major issue right now is trying to get the American left and sort of the anti-Semitic right to join together in bad faith and try to put pressure on this administration. So as Christians, you can decide what you want to do. We should pray for the benefit of this country. We should pray for the people in Iran. We should pray for the people that are involved all around in all the bases. But we should also be okay about the fact that you can decide where you stand, but I believe this is a just conflict. I think it's a good conflict. I think we took out evil people, that we should be able to say that in the Western world. And the fact that we're so shy about saying that this is a good thing, grow up. And if you don't know, just say nothing. But the constant refrain and fear-mongering, it's the same groups all the time. I don't know what else to say. The irony that you have people in the streets sort of protesting the bombing of Iran, where you have Iranians wanting their freedom. It's just, I don't know, pay attention a little bit. But for my sake, I say we urge all of us to obviously pray. God is truly in control. I don't think this is a prophetic timeline or anything like that. But I do think this is a wonderful moment that we should be proud of our country, our nation, our soldiers, but also the strategic decision-making to get to this place. It is. I remember back in college, I took a class in the technology of war. Just the sophistication of what has just transpired is not something we yawn at. It is an amazing thing. Just the precision of this and the rest of it. So anyways, that's my thought. If you have any other ideas, feel free to put it in the comments. I won't respond to it, but I'll definitely read it. But to that end, let me say a quick prayer, and we'll jump into tonight as we talk about atheism. So God, we want to pray, first of all, for the conflict globally happening. We want to pray for any innocent life that is lost in this, and that we just pray that for our commander-in-chief, for the rest of the generals, the people, Pete Hegseth, the rest that are at the helm in this, we just ask for the benefit of the West, that the ideology of that has been running and ruling over the Persian people in such a terrible way would be eliminated. I ask, Father, that you would do your work in such a way that you would be glorified in the end, that the gospel would spread more freely, that we would see peace perhaps in the Middle East, at least for this time that we're here, that we can be a part of watching that transpire. Father, we ask for this conflict to end very rapidly. I pray for our country to be extremely effective, extremely precise. That you would protect our nation from all of the political, just sort of dumb rhetoric that constantly gets everyone in their hands wringing. I pray for your church in particular to be wise. Help us to be wise what we post and what we say. Obviously, people have very strong opinions, and they're welcome to say it, and we understand that. But Lord, help us to be good ambassadors for you. We are first and foremost representatives of the kingdom that is coming. But today, as we are American citizens, we also ask that you would bless our nation and that you would achieve goals that benefit this nation and the gospel going forth. We praise you and ask that you to help tonight, help me to teach well. I pray for the Shepherds Conference coming up, for the pastors going to that, and for the book launch and the podcast, and all the fun things that are happening here. But I just pray that you would expand and use me and this church and all the people here tonight to be able to be effective witnesses to the atheists, to the non-believers, to the skeptics. And Father, help us just not be intimidated. We're just always so intimidated by all the noise and the Twitterati and the people that are yelling at us. Just help us tonight to have boldness and calmness in truth. We praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so tonight I skipped ahead a couple chapters. Now, if you want to read the book, I'd urge you to do it. John Lennox, again, let me remind you really quickly where we're at. Every week I want to remind you, 2006, Richard Dawkins wrote The God Delusion. 2007, John Lennox wrote The God's Undertaker, Has Science Buried God?, which is a response to Dawkins' God the Delusion. And in the response, the takedown that he does of Dawkins is phenomenal. And it's in this chapter tonight, chapter 10, that we jump to, that I think finishes his case really well and sort of reveals the heart of Dawkins' argument. But the point of what I'm doing is kind of revisiting like an old school UFC fight. It's like going back and watching a fight from 20 years ago, literally, and then we're kind of sitting here and analyzing it in the aftermath. And so I would argue in the realm of this went to, Lennox completely won this, but most of us weren't paying attention. Things moved on. Right? Things moved on to the next thing. In fact, we're not really talking about Minnesota right now, right? Things moved on, right? We move on in our politics, we move on in our theology, we move on in what we're interested in. Sometimes it's helpful to go back and revisit, not for nostalgic sake. This isn't like a photo album. We're like, oh, remember that time where no, this isn't that. This is the idea that I believe that things come back around, that there's, just like in style, there's sort of theological style. Things come back into style. They come back into the realm of what we talk about. And so one of those things I believe is going to be a more robust secularism. And I think the things that we're saying, even the comments I made before I prayed about Islam and the rest, there's going to be a reaction against that, a desire for that secular worldview. And the shock troops of that ideology are going to be a reimagining of Dawkins and the rest. Lennox in chapters 8 and 9 in particular really gets into genetics, really gets into DNA sequencing. It's a phenomenal couple chapters. I can't read it to you. It's great, but I would be saying to you things, it is inside baseball. It's great reading. It's not so much great me reading to you reading, if that makes sense. I'd be saying words I can barely pronounce. You would get the idea really quick. Suffice it to say, DNA is complex. It is not even as simple as computer zeros and ones. It is like a language, and the complexity is beyond all what we can understand. He also brings up the idea of information, because DNA and the rest presents the idea that there's information that is given in all these things, which means there's receivers and the rest. And when I say information, we have to understand it. Briefly, I'm summarizing what he said in 2 chapters, but right now, if you're on the internet, if you have internet on your phone right now, you have Wi-Fi, and you have information packets, and you can determine information in a synthetic sense. You can measure information in a synthetic sense. Do you guys, how many of you ever heard of what I'm talking about, synthetic information? Anyone? Oh, okay. What we're measuring with synthetic information is bits, data bits and bobs, how many bits we have, how many letters we have, how many things. So if I said to you a message of 4 letters, here's the combos, how many bits could there be, how many measures? You're trying to keep information coming through. That is a measure of information at a base level of bits and bobs, okay? But synthetic information is not quite the same thing. What information is contained in the sentence isn't necessarily in the sentence. I could write a program that tells you to repeat something over and over again, and so in the information, that's more syntactical, right? It's not just synthetic. There's information there. That means there's someone that's going to do something intelligently with the message that they were just told. When you combine that with things like the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, there is, yes, synthetic information, but syntactical information is that you have paragraphs and sentences, and they tell you things. They have information that's not contained in how many letters there are. I can say a short sentence that's profoundly deep and a long sentence that's silly. But in both cases, it's that second point that really brings information to a category that's very hard to measure. And Lennox doesn't even get into the implications of it, but chapter 10, he's getting into this idea, an analogy of that Dawkins kind of talks about as the monkeys and the typewriter. And so we're going to get into it tonight. So chapter 10, Richard Dawkins contends that unguided natural processes can account for the origin of biological information. Not external source of information, or rather no external source of information is necessary. In The Blind Watchmaker, he uses an analogy whose roots lie in an argument alleged to have been used by T.H. Huxley in his famous debate with Wilberforce in Oxford in 1860. Huxley is said to have argued that apes typing randomly and granted long life, unlimited supplies of paper, and endless energy would eventually type out one of Shakespeare's poems or even a whole book by chance. I want you to understand what he's saying. He's saying if you just gave enough monkeys in a room enough time, eventually Shakespeare is going to pop out, just through random processes. Now, the problem is these types of statements can sound interesting, but now we have people like mathematicians, probability people, to say, like, what actually are we advocating for? How narrow is that chance? Well, first of all, we have to acknowledge it's hardly likely that Huxley even said such a thing because the typewriter hadn't been on the market until 1874, and this debate was in 1860, but it doesn't matter. The story itself is set in stone. It's one people tell. And the whole part of it, within the limit now set for the age of the universe, let alone that set for Earth itself, it's easy to see that even the analogy given is mathematical nonsense. The eminent mathematician Giancarlo Rota, in a book on probability, which was unfinished at the time of his death, wrote, quote, "If the monkey could type one keystroke every nanosecond, the expected waiting time until the monkey types out Hamlet is so long that the estimated age of the universe is insignificant by comparison. This is not a practical method for writing plays." The calculations aren't hard to do. For example, Russell Grigg, in his article, "Could Monkeys Type the 23rd Psalm?" calculates that if a monkey types one key at random per second, the average time to produce the word "the" is 34.72 hours. To produce something as long as the 23rd Psalm, a short Hebrew poem, obviously we know, made up of 603 letters, verse numbers, and spaces, would take on average around 10 to the 1,017th power years. That's 10 with more than 1,000 zeros after it. You could win the lottery like 1,000 times before that's even getting close to the numbers here. The current estimate of the age of the universe lies somewhere between 4 and 15 times 10 to the 9 years. So 10 with 9 zeros would be the age that they say the universe is, but you would need 10 to the 1,017 zeros to get the 23rd Psalm based on the kind of what they're saying. Since July 1st, 2003, there's been a monkey typewriting random number generator simulator, which has been operating and which simulates monkeys typing one key a second. This has been going, so again, I love science. This is one of the things I love. And since 2003, we've had this going on. And just think about this. 2003, during the time Dawkins is writing it, this is something people are interested in, right? They started with 100 monkeys, and this number doubles every few days. And of course, there's an unlimited supply of bananas in the analogy, right? So there's no problem here. But the current record right now is 24 consecutive letters from Shakespeare's Henry IV, produced in around 10 to the 40th power monkey years, which the age of the universe is estimated, again, less than 10 to 11th power. So again, even just getting 24 consecutive letters from Shakespeare's play takes 4 times the amount of the age of the entire universe in estimation. If correct me if I'm wrong. If you have better calculations than this, then what are you doing listening to me? But calculations of this kind have long since persuaded most scientists, Dawkins included, that purely random processes cannot account for the origin of complex information Latin systems. Now, let me make sure we don't miss what's being said. What Lennox is doing is that he's not building a straw man. He's not saying that Dawkins believes it. But here's the problem. Dawkins has been presenting himself as saying that randomness, unguided, uncorrected randomness does produce these things. Well, Dawkins himself admits, well, time out. These calculations make it sure, obviously, purely random processes can't account for it. Well, this is where the cheating gets cut in. Dawkins cites Isaac Asimov's estimate of the probability of randomly assembling a hemoglobin molecule from amino acids, and such a molecule consists of 4 chains of amino acids twisted together, and each of the chains consists of 146 amino acids. And there are 20 different kinds of amino acids found in living beings. And the number of possible ways of arranging these 20 in a chain of 144 lengths long is 20 to the 146th power, which is 20 with 146. It's a lot, which is about 10 to the 190th power, whatever. It's just a lot. It's so big. These numbers are so big, I can't talk about them, okay? Marissa, you can talk about them, right? But you know all the numbers. They're big numbers. Am I wrong? Are they small numbers? How big are these numbers? Are they like, they're big. They're so big, okay? So we got to remind the readers here, because what I'm saying, the numbers are so huge, they're just embarrassing for me to say. They're big. We remind the reader of Dawkins' unequivocal conclusion, quote, It is grindingly, creakingly, crashingly obvious that if Darwinism were really a theory of chance, it couldn't work. You don't need to be a mathematician or a physicist to calculate that an eye or hemoglobin molecule would take from here to infinity to self-assemble by sheer higgly-piggly luck. Okay, so why am I saying this? Because this is the thing. I'm going to give you an analogy right now that's going to confuse you, but it is actually helpful if you can catch it, okay? In Christian circles, one of the debates that people have is between understanding God's free will and man's free will and predestination and all this. And you see that there's a debate, people will say, between Calvinists and Arminians. And that was a big debate. But and there is a debate. There's been a debate in history between, but the debate between Calvinists and Arminians is not between determinism. Both Arminians and Calvinists believe that the future is determined, that there is election. There's no debate between them. In fact, there's no Orthodox Christianity. You cannot be a Christian at a certain point. You can be a Christian and not know anything, but you cannot be a Christian and deny explicitly that election's a thing. You're outside of normal thinking. So Arminians and Calvinists both believe that election exists. They both believe that the future is determined. The debate is the basis of that determination. The Arminian says, well, God looked down the course of time, saw what man would do. The Calvinist says, no, God shows what man would do before he did any looking. Man couldn't exist. That's the debate. Modern day Arminians, I don't really hear often. The argument typically is not made against the basis of election. The argument is against determinism itself. And that's not really a debate in Christendom. There is no debate in Christendom that the future is determined because that would go against God's omniscience, omnipotence, and the rest. There's no debate about it. There's just not a debate about it. There isn't one. And if someone says, hey, I don't like this, I'm like, great, that's fine. You're not debating me, you're debating the Bible and every theologian for the last thousands of years. There just isn't a debate about determinism unless you're in a heretical camp, which there is called open theism. And there's always heretical camps. There's always heretical camps. But I just want you to understand how far outside the norm they are, theologically speaking. The reason I say that, though, is that the popular level argument against Calvinism is that we don't like determinism. And that's not the argument. Similarly, when it comes to evolution and chance, the debate typically is that it is random, it is unguided, it is random things that make everything. It is not intelligence. There is no intelligence, is the argument. Things look designed, they look intelligent designed, but they're not. Let me tell you, Dawkins says they're not. They're not intelligent design. And all of a sudden he's saying, wait a second, well, I don't mean that they're purely random. Well, that's a big tell. That is an entirely giant different debate. In other words, do you guys all follow what I'm saying? Is like it's not sexy to say, well, there is this thing, like a secret head monkey. Well, that's not very good. No one's gonna be excited about that. Again, I've referred to it again and again, but one of the guys who was talking about, he wrote a book called The Universe from Nothing. And his whole point was, Christians are so silly, making fun of atheists, saying that you just think the universe came out of nothing. He goes, well, we have now evidence that the universe did come out of nothing, or how it could have come out of nothing. And he says, because nothing really is a vacuum, and out of this vacuum came something. I'm like, but a vacuum is something. It isn't just nothing, it is a vacuum. And so what he did is he said, there's this vacuum that we named nothing that created everything. Well, that's not a good title for a book. It doesn't say the universe from a vacuum we named nothing. You wouldn't even read that book. That's like me saying that, what's my son's name? This is my son, handsomest ever. Oh, is your son the handsomest ever? Yes, he is. I guess he must be. That's his name. Like, it's cheap. It's silly, and the fact we fall for it, it's okay. We're just bored. We're doing other things. We got to pay attention to, like, Super Bowl halftimes, right? So we have time to focus on this stuff. But anyways, Darwin makes the case here that, yeah, what we think he's been arguing for, he agrees with us. It can't just have happened by random chance. It's a huge thing. Sir Fred Hoyle, the astrophysicist of Chandra Wickramasinghe, shared Dawkins' view on the capabilities of pure. If that's you and you hear this, sorry, man. My name's Matt Smith. It's pretty easy. But on the capabilities of pure chance process that no matter how large the environment one considers, life cannot have had a random beginning. Troops of monkeys thundering away at random on typewriters could not produce the works of Shakespeare for the practical reason that the whole observable universe is not large enough to contain the necessary monkey hordes, the necessary typewriters, and certainly not the waste paper baskets required for the deposition of wrong attempts. The same is true for living material. The likelihood of spontaneous formation of life from inanimate matter is 1 to a number with 40,000 no's after it. It is big enough to bury Darwin and the whole theory of evolution. There was no primeval soup, neither on this planet nor on any other, and if the beginning of life were not random, they must therefore have been the product of purposeful, intelligent, unquote. The question is Mount Improbable climbable? All seem agreed then, right? That the chance that the origin of the constituents of life seems to be dead in the primeval soup, right? So then how can the origin of such complexity be explained without God? Dawkins tries to do it. The way he does it, he says, Dawkins attempts to solve the difficulty of the origin of the systems whose highly specified complexity rules out a chance origin. Interesting. By, quote, breaking the improbability up into small, manageable parts, smearing out the luck needed, going round the back of Mount Improbable, and crawling up the gentle slope inch by million-year inch. I'm so irritated. But let me just make sure you follow up. Let's follow Dawkins up the mountain for a second and see what he means. He wants to break up these processes that we're talking about. Now, these processes we're talking about to create life are way more complex than a monkey typing Hamlet, extremely more, like by a big margin. But he's like, yeah, but what if you just had him type up one word? Well, the word "the" took only 34 hours, right? Is that what I said? Or 34 days, or whatever it was, something like that? 34 days or hours? What did I say? Hours? Yeah, 34 hours. Essentially what he's going to do is he's going to say, well, if you get each part, you can get it faster. Yeah, but that means that you have a goal in mind, a plan. That's what a plan is. You have a plan, so you can do each part of the plan very quickly. The irony of Dawkins' entire case is that he's proving intelligence. It's his whole case. And I'm not a weirdo. I'm not a smart guy. I'm telling you what he's saying. Let's just make sure we don't miss it. He says this. Let's say there's 1,000 steps at the top of the mountain, and let's take a look at a very simplified situation where there are only two choices at every step. One leads to something viable, the other does not. So the natural selection will eliminate, and each step is independent. And what is the probability of finding the right path up the mountain? 1 in 2 to the 1,000. That's about 1 in 10 to the 300. I don't even understand all that, but it's a lot. Let me just say this. That's smaller than the probability of the random assembly of the hemoglobin molecule in the first place, and so Dawkins' mountain climb is improbable in more senses than one. In other words, doesn't get him any better. Nobel Prize-winning physicist Brian Josephson of Cambridge points out another hidden assumption in Dawkins' attempt to climb his mountain. Quote, in such books as The Blind Watchmaker, a crucial part of the argument concerns whether there exists a continuous path leading from the origin of life to man, each step of which is both favored by natural selection and small enough to have happened by chance. It appears to be presented as a matter of logical necessity that such a path exists, but actually there's no such logical necessity. Rather, commonly made assumptions in evolution require the existence of such a path. In other words, a plan. That's the whole point. The only way out of the probabilistic impasse is to try to drastically increase the probabilities. And this is precisely what Dawkins does in his book, The Blind Watchmaker. It's breathtaking what he does. He claims that the origin of life was far from a purely chance process, although, according to him, it must have begun with something simple enough to have arisen by chance. But then instead of having a purely one-step sieving process like that of jumbling together all the amino acids constituent of a hemoglobin and hoping to get the molecule by chance, he suggests that the process was a kind of cumulative sieving or a selection in which the results of one of the sieving or selecting processes are fed into the next. According to Dawkins, this introduces a measure of law-likeness into the process so that it can be thought of as a combination of chance and necessity. Check out his illustration. To illustrate this, he used a computer simulation of a variant of Huxley's typing monkeys analogy and gives us an algorithm based on it. This monkey analogy has been used over and over. That's where we're using it. He now imagines the monkeys have a target phrase. His chosen example being the Shakespearean phrase, "Methinks it is like a weasel," which is taken from Hamlet. The phrase is 28 letters long, and we count the spaces as letters, and we take the alphabet to consist of 26 letters in one space. So the situation is we have 28 monkeys, one corresponding to each letter of the target sequence, sitting in a row and typing. And each monkey, therefore, has a target letter in the target phrase, and we first calculate the probability of them producing the target phrase by random typing. The chance of getting the first letter of the phrase by random typing is only 1 in 27, and 2 letters right and 1 in 27 times. So essentially, basically much faster. right? To put another way, the target phrase is a particularly isolated point in the space of a trillion other points, and a point that we have to find by some efficient process. So what's his solution to the problem of increasing these tiny probabilities to more manageable proportions? Well, here it is. Here's the cheat. Each time a monkey hits a letter, the letter it types is compared with its target letter. That sounds like a highly non-random process to me. You mean you have a target letter? Yeah, cool. This comparison, of course, has to be done by some mechanism, a computer or by a head monkey, as mathematician David Berlinski delightfully suggests. If the monkey has typed its target letter, the comparison mechanism retains that letter. In other words, the monkey's just hitting random letters like, is it this letter? No. Is it this letter? No. Is it this letter? No. Is it this letter? Yes. And then he keeps going. What about this one? Is it this one? Is it this one? Is this one? Yes. That's his whole point. I want to make sure you understand, like, this is his analogy for like God not for no intelligence. It's breathtaking, his confidence and his bluster. And the people that quote this with confidence and bluster, it's breathtaking. It is overwhelmingly breathtaking. The net result of this, the target phrase, you get it. We've now reached the heart of his argument. Remember what he's claiming to show, that natural selection, a blind, mindless, unguided process, has the power to produce biological information. But it shows nothing of the kind, obviously. Dawkins has solved his problem only by doing what? Introducing the very two things he explicitly wishes at all costs to avoid. In his book, he tells us that evolution is blind and without a goal. So what then does he mean by introducing a target phrase? That sounds like, you told me a letter, I can see it, and I have a goal, and it doesn't hit it or it does. A target phrase is a precise goal, which according to Dawkins himself is a profoundly un-Darwinian concept. And how could blind evolution not only see that target, but also compare and attempt with it in order to select it if it's nearer than the previous one? Well, Dawkins tells us that evolution is mindless. What then does he mean by introducing two mechanisms, each of which bear every evidence of the input of an intelligent mind, a mechanism that compares each attempt with the target phrase, and a mechanism which preserves a successful attempt? And strangest of all, the very information that the mechanisms are supposed to produce is apparently already contained somewhere within the organism, whose genesis he claims to be simulated by his process. The argument's entirely circular. Totally. Indeed, mathematician David Berlinski, in a much-discussed article, rather trenchantly comments, the entire exercise is an achievement in self-deception. And that's the sad part of it all. He says the target phrase, iterations which resemble the target, a computer or head monkey that measures the distance between failure and success. If things are sightless, how is the target represented? And how is the distance between randomly generated phrases and the target assessed? And by whom? The head monkey? What of him? The mechanism of deliberate design purged by Darwinian theory on the level of the organism has reappeared somehow in the description of natural selection itself, a vivid example of what Freud meant by the return of the repressed. In other words, Dawkins says, I don't believe in intelligent design, and then inserted it right into his model. He said he just would rather believe in a head monkey than in a creator. Dawkins' more sophisticated biomorph program goes into the same thing, but again, further, Dawkins' analogy has to introduce the very features whose existence he denies for it to work in his analogies. What Dawkins has really shown is that sufficiently complex systems, such as language of any type, including the genetic code of DNA, are not explicable without the pre-injection of the information sought into the system. Otherwise, it's just squiggles. A simpler example of what's going on here is provided by a self-winding watch. Such a device uses the random movements of the wrist. This is a self-winding watch. And if my arm moves, it winds it up. And Dawkins is like, that's how the whole universe was created. Do you see? But think about this for a second. How does it do that? Well, an intelligent watchmaker has designed a ratchet that allows a heavy flywheel to move in only one direction. And so therefore, it effectively selects those movements of my wrist and my arm, which cause the flywheel to move, and it blocks others, and the ratchet is the result of what? Intelligent design. Such a mechanism, according to Dawkins, can't be Darwinian. His blind watchmaker has no foresight. To quote Berlinski again, quote, the Darwinian mechanism neither anticipates nor remembers. It gives no directions. It makes no choices. What is unacceptable in evolutionary theory, what is strictly forbidden, is the appearance of a force with the power to survey time, a force that conserves a point or a property because it will be useful, like the ratchet in the future. In other words, like evolution does not plan ahead. It's not like, hey, I might need this later. Let me just put this in the drawer for when I need it. It doesn't plan. That's the whole point. Such a force is no longer Darwinian. How would a blind force know such a thing, and by what means could future usefulness be transmitted to the present? It just doesn't make sense. It's just not coherent in his own system. He goes on and I could go on. But in Dawkins' original typing monkey version, selection would only retain attempts at the target that had some function. That's the idea. So let me go back. So when we deal with like irreducibly complex things, where you need lots of things to happen at the same time, right? Let's just think about that for a minute. Michael Behe, which we talked about earlier, criticizes Dawkins here, and he says, he brings up a guy named Elliot Sober, who uses Dawkins' analogy, in which he imagines a combination lock that can be opened only by the combination me thinks it is a weasel. Same idea. They're all talking to each other, okay? The reason I love this is that you're entering into an internal debate. The me thinks it is a weasel thing, you're like, oh, that's a scientist, another scientist. It's an inside joke, that's how they use it. But the combination lock is composed of 19 disks placed, okay, you get it. And we imagine the disks are randomly spun, and so basically, just like doing a lock, you just go till you hear a click, and then you know, okay, that's the one number. That's what they're trying to say. But Michael Behe points out in the analogy, it purports to be an analogy for natural selection, which requires a function, but what function is there in a lock combination that's wrong? Right? You're like, oh, that combination didn't work. I'm like, well, then it wouldn't work. It's not selected for later work. It's my same analogy that was very not good of the squirrel that can't run or fly because it was halfway. And that's like at a morphological level. At the cellular level, it doesn't even work. I mean, suppose after spinning the disk for a while, we had half the letters right. Instead of me thinks it is a weasel, you had and it's like kind of some of the letters in there. Every other letter is correct, let's say. The analogy asserts that this is an improvement over a random string of letters. Like if you lost your golf ball and you go in the woods and I find another ball, I'm not closer to finding my ball. Do you guys all follow that analogy? I'm like, hey, I must be getting close. I found another golf ball. I'm like, how does that have anything to do with the golf ball that I'm aiming at? Like that I'm looking for. It's not like, oh, that golf ball means I'm getting closer to this golf. It's a totally separate thing. It's not related. It's not halfway there. And that's his whole point. This random thing isn't halfway there. It's not an improvement. You're back to the beginning every time. If your reproductive success depended on opening the lock, you'd leave no offspring. And ironically, for Sober and Dawkins, a lock combination is a highly specified, irreducibly complex system, which beautifully illustrates why, for such systems, function cannot be approached gradually. You need the combo immediately, or it doesn't unlock. It's not kind of unlocked. You're not kind of pregnant. You're not kind of unlocked. It's the idea. So again, in his original typing monkeys version, a selection is only kept when retain attempts at the target that had some function, which in terms of the analogy would mean that whatever the monkeys typed at every intermediate step in the process would have to form words that made sense. On such terms, by simply looking at the output of Dawkins' simulation, the processes couldn't even start. His ideas simply cannot begin to cope with the irreducible complexity. Quote, instead of an analogy for natural selection acting on random mutation, the Dawkins-Sober scenario is actually an example of the very opposite, an intelligent agent directing the construction of an irreducibly complex system. So again, as you go through it, what's happening here? We have used an intelligently programmed device to remove the real problem we originally set out to solve, which wasn't the generation of building blocks or letters, but getting them in the right order. The superficial impression given is that we've generated all the information contained in the string we thinks it is like a weasel, but we haven't. All we've done is generated a known string in a partially random manner. No new information is obtained. To put it another way, Dawkins' mechanism claims to be a mechanism for increasing probability, but the effect of increasing probability in this way is to reduce complexity. For something to be complex, as we've seen, there must be many other real options that could take its place, but Dawkins' algorithm can only produce one outcome, his target phrase. And that's with the probability of 1. So the information added to the process is precisely 0. In other words, once you actually get the phrase, me thinks it is a weasel, you actually haven't added information, you've just finished the information that was there. You guys all follow? It's not like new information. It's like, me thinks it's a weasel and it's stinky or something. It doesn't add to it. You've added 0 information. You've just done it. So in other words, you fulfilled the plan. You didn't build a plan. That's a big deal. It should be noted in passing the fact that a correctly typed key is retained, never to be lost again, is equivalent to making the assumption that advantageous mutations are always preserved in the population. Like we know that that's not true. As evolutionary biologist Sir Ronald Fisher showed in his foundational work, this is actually not the case at all in nature. Most beneficial mutations get wiped out by random effects. So for example, and here's something interesting. So I'm going to go off script for a second. We are an unobservant people. That's the best way I'll say it. The worldviews that are being pressed upon us in the lab sometimes don't come to us in the lab. They come to us in pop culture. So when Dawkins was popular, and this was popularized, what became popular in the movies was what? X-Men. Mutations that give you superpowers, right? Well, right now when we're doing multiverse stuff, what's popular? Spider-Man and the multiverse, and Avengers now is multiverse. And so with all the point being is our imagination is shaped in such a way where we say, yeah, with enough mutations, maybe I can't shoot lasers out of my eyes. Like maybe if I like X-Men or this, and like that's the kind of point. And then we inject all this stuff. And yes, it's comic book stuff, but that's the whole point of it. This is the mythology we're telling ourselves at the time that we're studying this is X-Men. That's the worldview. That's the heroic X-Men. That's the picture. And now we're like, okay, this was all rejected essentially. It's like, it's just too much. And so then what are we into now? Multiverse. There's definitely a multiverse somewhere where this is true. And so we've got all the Spider-Mans. And that's what I'm trying to say. Like, if there's nothing wrong with watching the things and enjoying it, but like we should understand sort of the cultural milieu that we're in, right? Because I'll follow what I'm saying. Kind of we see the popular thing. What's the popular thing that we're doing? Like, for example, we brought it up years ago, but like all the Disney shows, what's the number one message in Disney? It's never like defeat evil. It's always like make the vampires and the zombies hang out together at high school because they all should be included. That's the lesson. Zombie high, like the villains and the good guys, that we'd all get together. Like there's just these constant lessons. I just find it fascinating that the X-Men was just mutations going on. But in real life, in actual biology, the X-Men's theory would be terrible because, hey, I could shoot my eyes. What happened? Now I can't. I just lost, like the next generation loses it. You just don't keep the mutation. It doesn't keep going. Don't argue with me about X-Men. I don't care about if you're someone that wants to tell me about the canon of X-Men, actually definitely do that. I'd be happy to hear that. I'm not going to mock you. Everyone else will. It's a canon stuff with this is great. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm sorry. What does it mean? Dawkins' model is useless as a simulation of how complexity, in the sense of getting the letters in the right order, can be built from a random sequence by an undirected evolutionary process. For the postulation of the existence of a mechanism to compare an attempt with the target sequence and retain it means that the real problem of getting the letters in the right order has simply been solved before you start. This is the part I'm trying to get. Like smart people with British accents should become, like Lennox has a British accent. Is he British? I feel like he's British. He's got an accent, so he's a smart guy that went against this. But we need to be better thinkers and be able to examine things. It's been factored out of the problem completely by being built in the system, the effect that, not surprisingly, you can reach your target sequence in a very small number of steps. But you know what's even faster than that is just photocopying the number and setting the thing and printing it out. I mean, like, Philip Johnson's captured that, right? He says, it takes more human intelligence to program the computer to generate methinks it is like a weasel from random letter selection than it does to just hit the print key and print the target phrase in the computer's memory where you wrote it in the first place. He's like, let's just cut to the chase. What's all this have to do with us, and how do we conclude this one? And we'll get into more information next week, but here's the paper I wrote. It should be on the app under classes if you hit notes or papers or something. And then there's also a position, I think, on our website somewhere for this, but I'd urge you to go to it. But I wrote this. It's called The Squiggle That Gave It Away. Why Dawkins' random mutation argument quietly borrows what it denies. So this is sort of my summary with a few points, okay? Let's be clear at the outset, the goal is not to, quote, defeat Richard Dawkins. He's welcome to stand exactly where he stands, and the goal is to show the ground beneath him is not as solid as he thinks, and it's certainly not solid enough to justify the cultural swagger that tells Christians that we occupy the impossible position. The real debate isn't science versus faith. It's not data versus superstition. It's worldview versus worldview. I've said this every week. It's about lenses. Famous demonstration. Let's go back to it. In The Blind Watchmaker, Dawkins attempts to show how cumulative selection can produce design without a designer. And he used a computer simulation, often summarized by the phrase, methinks it is like a weasel. And here's how it works. Let me just remind you again. Target phrase is chosen. Random mutations generate variations. The computer selects the string closest to the target. That string becomes the parent of the next generation. You repeat until the phrase appears. And behold, design appears to emerge from randomness, except it doesn't. Back when I was younger, I don't know if I mentioned this, I used to play Monopoly with myself. Did I tell you guys that? Did you guys hear that before? Does anyone think that makes me a nerd? I just made fun of people that had the canon of X-Men, but I've just revealed my nerdiness. I played Monopoly with myself as a child. I wasn't abused or anything. My parents are great. They're here. They love me. I wanted to play Monopoly with myself. So I'd get my teddy bear set up or my animals or whatever, and I'd set it up to play. But I wanted it to be a fair game. So I'd be like, hey, I want to trade. Why don't you give me Boardwalk and I'll give you Oriental Avenue? And the teddy bear would have to say yes or no. So I'd roll dice. And if the dice were over like a 6, that meant yes. And so I would give trades to it. Now, first of all, and if it said no, and so frequently what would happen as a child is I would make ridiculous offers. Rolled the dice to see, and I got some great trades. But often, the teddy bear would say no to me. I'd offer a really good trade. I'm like, hey, I'll take Boardwalk, and you can have, St. James Place for it. How about this? I'll give you $1 for Boardwalk, and we roll it, and it says no. And I'm like, okay, well, let me try again. How about now? And I'd roll it again, and strangely, I kept winning. It was a random process, though. I just happened to win all the time. I don't think I ever got beat. I have an undefeated record in that thing. And I could fully say it was random. I mean, I was rolling dice and giving random answers. I just could keep asking it until I got the answer that was going to happen all along. That's what Dawkins just did. In public, in a book, and behold, design appears to emerge from randomness. Except it doesn't, because hidden inside his demonstration is the intelligent mechanism. It knows its goal. I'm going to get Boardwalk. It measures the progress towards it. Oh, you said no, I'll just roll again. It preserves favorable mutations. Oh, I like that trade, I'll keep it. It discards unfavorable ones. That's not unguided evolution. That's teleology's purpose with the word God erased. The selection mechanism is intelligent. It evaluates, it prefers, it directs. The very thing the experiment's claiming to eliminate is smuggled back in under the name selection. So why smuggle intelligence into the system at all? Because without it, nothing happens. Pure randomness does not accumulate meaning. It does not aim. It does not evaluate. It does not preserve toward a future state. The moment you introduce words like better, closer, fitter, progress, you've introduced a standard. And standards are not random. They're judgments. And judgments are not properties of molecules. So what happened? An intelligent sorting mechanism was quietly slipped in like a squiggle drawn in the margin to fix the math. And that squiggle gave the game away. If we're already invoking an unknown evaluator in the system, an invisible selector, an observed preference mechanism, a direction toward complexity, then we're already in the realm of intelligence. So the question becomes, what is more reasonable? An unknown, invisible head monkey embedded in the machinery of matter, mysteriously guiding mutations towards functional complexity that we can't actually see, by the way, or know or measure or anything else, or an intelligent creator who designed life with a purpose from the beginning, and that purpose seems to be so obvious that we all acknowledge it's there. The heavens declare the glory of God. Day to day pours forth speech. Everything we study fits that picture. If intelligence must exist somewhere in the explanatory chain, why bury it in the basement? Why is designer at the beginning irrational, but mysterious selector inside the process somehow scientific? The difference is not data. It's a philosophical commitment. Dawkins' confidence is not scientific certainty. It's metaphysical commitment. It's bluster. The controlling assumption is there must not be a designer. And that assumption precedes the argument. It governs what explanations are allowed. It polices the conclusions. So why do I say this? Because this is not about, why would he even bring, the fact that gives it away, why even try to bury Christianity? Right? It's not science versus Christianity, it's naturalism versus theism. Naturalism says that matter's ultimate. Intelligence has to arise from non-intelligence. Teleology is an illusion. Christianity says intelligence precedes matter. Mind precedes matter. Design reflects a designer, and meaning isn't accidental. There's the same data, just different lenses. So the question is, what lens makes better sense? Information and DNA, specified complexity, moral obligation, rational thought itself. That's the real question. Like the idea that if everything's random anyways, why would you trust your thoughts to be so ordered? The motivation behind his arrogance is very clear. And this is what I want us to see. There's the whole point of this, because I don't think you're going to be at the barber shop and get into the me thinks it is a weasel debate. I just don't think that's the game. And if it is, amen, hope this helped. But my whole point I want you to understand is to recognize the cultural tone of superiority and why the constant refrain that Christians are holding an impossible view is given. If design is allowed as a live option, then that means that all of a sudden the resurrection of Jesus is a real concern they have to contend with. If the resurrection is a real thing, then Christ is Lord. Because it happened in space and time and history. We believe all sorts of things from history with way less evidence than that. No, we need extreme evidence for that. I don't understand why you would say that. We have all the evidence we would need to believe anything in history. The confidence, though, isn't neutral. Dawkins' whole confidence is protect a boundary. If matter's all that exists, then miracles have to be impossible definition. Any intrusion, any designer, any purpose that's not the one that he makes up, that's not okay for him. That's not a scientific conclusion. Again, it's a philosophical rule imposed beforehand. He's playing Monopoly with the teddy bears. The resurrection is not rejected because it was disproven. It's rejected because a philosophical rule was imposed beforehand. And the resurrection is not ever disproven. That's not one of those things. It's just rejected because it's not even allowed. It's a worldview commitment. Most of us don't come to Christ because we studied Genesis. I didn't myself. I came to Christ because I heard about the story of Christ, and if it's true, all of a sudden Genesis became relevant. I'm like, well, I guess that fits with data just the same. That was amazing. The intimidation, though, is what I want to get to. It works like this. Speak confidently, use scientific vocabulary, frame disagreement as ignorance, declare victory, and if you have an accent, it helps. But underneath the rhetoric is a stack of unexamined assumptions. We're not standing on sketchy ground. Christianity uniquely explains why laws of nature exist, why rational minds can know truth, why moral outrage makes sense, why beauty moves us, why design looks designed. And it grounds all that in a historical claim. Christ died and rose again in space and time. A Jewish guy, 2,000 years ago, claimed to be God. That's an absurd thing. Stop and think about what we're just saying. A guy who slept and ate and got tired, walked around with people, and claimed to be God. And his own brothers didn't believe it. Would you? That's a crazy claim. And he did miracles that proved his claim somewhat, but even then, people didn't do it. And he said, listen, they're going to put me to death. I'm going to rise again. And when the resurrection happened, all the evidence, I'm telling you, none of the evidence is supernatural. You have an empty cave, right? You have the Jewish people who made up a reason why the cave was empty, which proves that it was empty, that there was a guy that was crucified that was supposed to be in it, and they gave reasons why it was empty. Oh, someone stole the body, or they're tricking us. All they proved was it was empty. So now you got a guy that exists, a guy that was crucified for claiming to be God, an empty tomb. What's supernatural about any of those things? Empty tomb's not supernatural. Anyone can claim to be God. That's not supernatural. Lying why the tomb, that's not supernatural. Women finding the tomb, that's not. Those are all normal evidences for something. You have to decide if you're going to believe the story that it was empty because he rose again. People said they saw him because he actually was there. Or you can say, I don't believe that. That's fine. You're allowed to decide which one. Here's the thing. Believing that he rose from the dead and he is who he says he is tends to also be a lens that explains everything we look at and also offers salvation and joy and peace and all the rest. That Christ is alive today and these things are true and experienced, but we don't come to this under a microscope. But I guess what I'm trying to tell you is what I'm telling you to believe or not is way more credible and reasonable than the crap that Dawkins is putting out. And my point isn't to be a jerk to somebody. It's just not to be intimidated by bluster. That's all. I'm not going to go to a non-believer and be like, oh yeah, blah, blah. I'm going to be kind and nice. This is a person made in the image of God. Naturalism says, Dawkins, everything arose from nothing. Intelligence came from non-intelligence. Meaning came from meaninglessness. Morality arose from chemistry, or reason arose from blind forces. Oh, do tell. What's the mechanism? A secret monkey? These are philosophical necessities that he has to put forward to keep God out. These are not impressive arguments. If we're only debating data, we're missing the point. That's the problem. Stop giving data away to non-believers. We have the same data they do. The question is, why is design ruled out in advance? On what grounds is materialism being assumed? I need to know that. How does randomness generate normativity? I'm still struggling with this. Could you help me understand that? Why would you trust your cognitive faculties that's shaped only for survival if that's the case? I'm just still wondering why we're studying this. Many naturalistic worldviews are unformed and unlivable. No one actually lives as if meaning is an illusion, if morality is a chemical reaction, as if love is a survival algorithm. Try that on your, I don't know, what do the people do these, what do the kids do these days? The Christian tingle, whatever, Christian mingle thing. You're like, hey, we're all meaningless, and we do see how many hits you get. Maybe you probably would get a lot of hits, never mind. Who knows? But we all live as if design, meaning, and purpose are real. And Christianity says they are. And this matters pastorally, not just for me, but for you as a shepherd of the message, right? We're ambassadors of truth. We can't be defensive. We shouldn't be combative, and we don't need to fear their confidence. Meekness is not insecurity, it is strength under control. If our worldview is coherent, and if it explains reality without having to have squiggles in the margin, it doesn't have to smuggle intelligence into blind systems, then we can speak calmly. I'm not trying to win. I'm trying to help an image bearer see their creator and hopefully their savior. Dawkins' simulation doesn't prove that design emerges from randomness. It just proves the opposite. It proves that selection, guided by intelligence, produces results, which is not a victory for blind evolution. It is an illustration of teleology. And he's free to stand there. But the Christian should not feel intimidated by the confidence of a system that must quietly borrow what it publicly denies. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for these things. I spoke with confidence and perhaps a lot of emotion, but at the same time, I ask you to help us to be gentle and reverent as we talk to people that we're no different than, but for the grace of God. I'm not a Christian because I'm smarter or I recognize these things with more intelligence. You are gracious toward me. And Father, we know that you are gracious toward people we could never imagine, that your gospel cuts through all sorts of things, and we know that the effective mechanism for belief is truly your Spirit working through your gospel being preached. Help us to understand, Father, the ways that our view is marginalized so that the gospel isn't ever given even a hearing. Help us to understand the task that we have to make it worthwhile for someone to actually hear the gospel. Lord, we know it's you that does the saving. Help us do the sharing, and help us have the apologetics that breaks down the walls that keeps people from listening to it be shared. We praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. We'll see you guys next week.